in what is quite an unprecedented event because of the situation with COVID. We are going to be taking this Nakba commemoration in Australia online, which has given us the amazing opportunity to be able to reach out to people in Palestine on the ground and have them share with us their stories and their experiences and struggles. And so it's going to be a really amazing opportunity for the next 2 hours. So we're very excited to have them here and to be able also to engage with you. I want to start by first thanking all our co-hosts, but actually before I do that, it's only fitting that in an event in which we are commemorating stolen land, that we acknowledge that we are holding this on stolen land, that we are holding this event on land that was never ceded, and that this land was and always will be Aboriginal land. I want to thank all the people and organisations who have allowed this amazing opportunity to come to fruition: the Palestinian community of Western Australia, Friends of Palestine Western Australia, Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, Friends of Palestine Tasmania, BDS Australia, Palestinian Community Association of Victoria, Free Palestine Melbourne, Palestine Action Group Sydney, Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network, Australian Palestinian Professionals Association, Australians for Justice and Peace in Palestine, and Kia Ora Gaza. Thank you to all of these organisations for their solidarity and for bringing this event together. So let's start with some housekeeping. This is going to be recorded, both audio and video, but we have disabled audio and video for the participants, except for the speakers. It will be recorded and shared on APAN and Friends of Palestine Western Australia website. We will start by, I will first give a short address from a perspective of an Australian Palestinian, and then we will be listening and hearing to our amazing speakers. We will have one video that has been pre-recorded by one of our speakers from Gaza, who was unable to join us because of the electricity cuts. Then you will have the amazing opportunity to engage with the speakers, and you can do that in 2 ways: by posting questions using the Q&A function. And if you want to make any comments or remarks, we encourage you to do that via the chat box function. So questions through the Q&A box function and comments and remarks in the chat box function. And of course, if you're on social media, we would love if you would, really try and get the word out, spread the word about what's happening using social media hashtags, hashtag Nakba Day and hashtag Nakba 72. We will be joined today by amazing speakers: Dr. Haidar Eid, who will be sending us a pre-recorded video from Gaza, Fayrouz Sharqawi, who is speaking to us from Jerusalem, Bassem Tamimi, who is speaking to us from the West Bank, and Tarek Bakri, who is speaking to us, I believe, also from Jerusalem. So we're in for an amazing treat. I don't know if I can contain the excitement if it's obvious on my face, but this is really a truly special event, and I'm so privileged to be able to be your MC today. And I wanted to start just to put what we are about to do into context from an Australian point of view. This commemoration is being hosted from Australia, and this is entirely appropriate when we consider that this country is uniquely positioned to understand the Palestinian fight for freedom, framed as it rightly should be as a settler colonial struggle. The struggle against Israeli colonization is a struggle against racism, ethnic cleansing, segregation, land theft, military occupation, discrimination, brutal oppression. I also understand the irony of me stating this, given I am a Palestinian born and living on stolen land. And so it is imperative that as Australian Palestinians, we remember that to tell the story of the theft and colonization of Palestine is to also tell the story about Australia. The Zionist myth of a land without a people for a people without a land, the myth of terra nullius in Australia, and our governments proudly declare their shared values. We are marking the 72nd year of the Nakba, and I stress the word of, not since, as the Nakba still has no end date, it is ongoing. On this 72nd anniversary, let's remember this is no conflict between two sides. This is not a war between two states, two military powers. This is a struggle with an overarching framework of colonization. The historical trajectory is crucial. When Palestinians rose up in Gaza in the Great March of Return, a lot of media and political commentators represented these mass protests as being about Trump's move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem on the eve of the Nakba in 2018. But this erased the historical trajectory, that this was fundamentally about the Nakba, the right of return, the right to return to one's home, the land you were expelled from, which has either been destroyed, greenwashed, or illegally occupied by Jewish Israelis. And this is something Tarek Bakri, one of our speakers today, is passionate about documenting with his visual documentation project, in which he uses old photos and oral history to help Palestinians find their original homes and villages. In 1948 and now 2020, the problem remains the same. How do you square the circle, creating and maintaining an exclusive Jewish nation when the land is inhabited by another majority, a people who have not disappeared and refuse to give up on their rights? The colonial framework is essential in order to understand. In 1902, Theodore Herzl, the founder of Zionism, wrote to white supremacist South African apartheid architect Cecil Rhodes, seeking support for Jewish settlements in Palestine. Herzl said, "You are being invited to make history. It doesn't involve Africa, but a piece of Asia Minor. Not Englishmen, but Jews. How then do I happen to turn to you, since this is out of the way matter for you? How indeed, because it is something colonial." When we understand the struggle through the frame of settler colonialism, racial apartheid, occupation, we can insist on reframing mainstream narratives which dehumanize Palestinians, which shift the blame of responsibility onto the victims, not the aggressors. Nowhere is this more apparent than Gaza, a population of 1.8 million trapped against a brutal economic warfare, besieged and imprisoned, habitually attacked in a policy deliberately described by the Israelis as a tactic of mowing the lawn. And yet it is Gazans who are held accountable for resisting, for rattling their cage. One of our speakers today, Dr. Haidar Eid, cannot even join us live because of the electricity cuts and has sent us a pre-recorded video. This is the duress and systematic state of subjugation that Palestinians face on a daily basis. Let's consider Donald Trump's recent Peace to Prosperity, the ultimate deal, a 181-page, staggeringly racist document that crudely laid bare the erasure of Palestinian agency, sovereignty, and consultation, what successive American governments have always done, but in more sophisticated ways than Trump. The deal of the century entrenched land annexation, population transfers, apartheid, and discrimination. And there wasn't even the pretense of negotiations with Palestinians. The people who now form about half the population in historic Palestine, and may in fact maybe once again a narrow majority between the River Jordan and the sea, were completely irrelevant. But there was nothing new about this. It reveals the logic of racism, a continuation of the colonial origins and treatment of Palestinians, and this is what we must continuously center in our advocacy. Can we forget that in 1917, Palestinians were 90% of the population? The Zionist settler colonial project could only succeed with the support of the British. And this is why Zionist appeals were based on the racist logic of indigenous Palestinians as invisible and inferior, something the British could obviously support. The Balfour Declaration made sense in a settler colonial racial logic. Privately, Balfour said, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants." In 2020, Trump's contemptible ultimate deal repeated this history, and these are the settler colonial dots we must connect in our advocacy. Historically, Australian governments have been reluctant to be overly critical of Israel, preferring instead to supposedly adopt a position of neutrality. Even neutrality, being neutral, is an illusion. In the context of Israel, an occupier in violation of countless international laws, in the context of its military supremacy, the claim that one is not taking sides is taking sides. While Israel's occupation, settlement, and apartheid machinery accelerates, sympathy for Palestinians has notably increased among the Australian public, and the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement gains more victories worldwide. Yet Australia's position has steadfastly shifted from disingenuous neutrality to staunch pro-Israeli support. Through its abstentions, it has approved Israel changing the status of Jerusalem, expanding illegal Jewish settlements, questioning the illegality of settlements, and attacking UN resolutions as biased. Just recently this year, Australia was shamefully one of 6 countries to try to block the International Criminal Court's investigation into Israel's war crimes because Australia doesn't recognise the state of Palestine. Australia's support of Israel in this context was not surprising, but its interference is no less outrageous. Australia was lobbied by Israel to argue against this probe, and Australia was not even involved in the court case. It went out of its way to do Israel's bidding and make submissions to the court. It is because of the shared illegitimate foundations of both states we must demand why the Israeli lobby wields such power over Australia. The logic of Israel and Australia's argument earlier this year exposed their larger strategy. If the International Criminal Court is ineligible because there is no Palestinian state, Israel and its allies will always work to ensure there is never a Palestinian state. Australia fell back by insisting that Palestinian statehood is subject to a negotiated peace settlement, the so-called two-state solution hoax. In the words of the brilliant and assassinated Ghassan Kanafani, such peace talks equate to a conversation between the sword and the neck. There is only one state. It is an apartheid state that stains the 21st century. It is the state that has been granted impunity for changing the status of Jerusalem in violation of clear international law. While America, Europe, and even Australia aid and abet Israel's annexation of Jerusalem, Palestinians on the ground have not stopped fighting. Today, we will be joined by Fayrouz Sharqawi, who works with grassroots movements in Jerusalem to hear about what's being done. Palestinian resistance has always been demonized and shut down. Boycotts, divestment, sanctions are denounced as anti-Semitic, armed resistance denounced as terrorism, recourse to international law, war against Israel. Since Israel's creation on stolen land 72 years ago, Israel and her allies have tried to crush Palestinian resistance. They have assassinated our intellectuals, poets, writers, killed our fighters, our lawyers, politicians, activists, and prisoners, imprisoned and killed our children, imprisoned like the unbelievably brave Haidar Tamimi, whose father, Bassem Tamimi, will be joining us today. In 2020, Israel, with its conspirators like Australia, have sent a message to Palestinians that there is nowhere on this earth where we will let you resist. You are ineligible, you have no jurisdiction in the arena of humanity. And yet Israel and Australia were both born on stolen land, and it is they who are illegitimate and have no standing. Settler colonial connections are crucial. Palestine is proximate, not distant. Justice there is fighting for justice here, and justice here is fighting for justice there. This was and always will be Aboriginal land, and Palestine will be free. And with that, I would like to now take you to our first speaker, Dr. Haidar Eid, who has given us a pre-recorded video, and I'd like to first introduce him. Dr. Haidar Eid is Associate Professor of Postcolonial and Postmodern Literature at Gaza's Al-Aqsa University and Al-Shabaka Policy Advisor. He has written widely on the Arab-Israeli conflict, including articles published at Znet, Electronic Intifada, Palestine Chronicle, and Open Democracy. He has published papers on cultural studies and literature in a number of journals, including Nebula, Journal of American Studies in Turkey, Cultural Logic, and the Journal of Comparative Literature. Haidar is the author of Worlding Postmodernism, Interpretive Possibilities of Critical Theory, and Countering the Palestinian Nakba, One State for All. So we will now hear his pre-recorded address, and a reminder to send your questions while he's talking through our Q&A chat function, and we will then get to all those questions in the second part of these proceedings. Thank you. Yeah. We're fixing it.
Militias. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of this important event on the Nakba. I was asked by them to be as brief as possible and be direct about the issues at hand, namely the Nakba, the situation in Gaza, and the way forward. That will definitely need more than the time allotted for this, for my session. Of course, if you are watching this recorded video instead of having me live on Zoom, that is only because we have no electricity, thanks to the imposed Israeli siege on Gaza. As most of you know, this year marks the 72nd anniversary of the Nakba, the process of ethnic cleansing carried out by Zionist militias in Palestine, which led to the displacement and dispossession of more than 750,000 Palestinians, including my own family. Both my parents died back in 2005, dreaming of the day when they would be allowed to return to the village of Zarnuga, from which they, together with the other villages, ethnically cleansed in 1948. Unfortunately, they died in 2005 without having the opportunity to see Zarnuga again. In order to avoid cold academic, or rather dry academic analysis, I will not only confine my deliberations to abstract concepts and theories, I will evoke the reality as we experience it and understand it on the ground here in Gaza and in the diaspora. We Palestinians are fully aware of the fact that we are the victims of an historic issue that has impacted the lives of many. It has polarized the discourse on international peace and security. What we have learned from history of state making is that it is not easy to maintain a state that is founded based upon a historical injustice and the denial of universal freedoms. History of states is littered with examples of people using all sorts of means of resistance in defense of their universal human rights and fundamental freedoms. Hence our decades-long multifaceted resistance. Now, any attempt to understand the rationale behind what is essentially a case of blatant violation of fundamental human rights is faced with accusations of anti-Semitism, which is a weapon used to silence voices calling for justice in the Middle East. We never tire of asking the question raised by the Nakba generation. A generation that was supposed to die, while we are supposed to forget. What is Palestinian cause if not right of return of the refugees, those inside and outside Palestine? Can genuine peace be achieved without resolving this? Zionism is based on the idea of separation, rejection of difference. ethno-religious supremacy. It is based on a dogma that claims that Jews all over the world constitute one nation. Zionist consciousness, we native Palestinians, exactly like Native Americans, I believe like Aboriginals in South Africa, became surplus population that must be gotten rid of. Those of us who remain would be considered a minority without political and national rights. So we native Palestinians were viewed by hegemonic Zionism as an obstacle realizing the Zionist dream by our mere existence and presence. This might explain the continuing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and the incremental genocide taking place in Gaza. Like any settler colonial power, and I'm glad that I'm talking to Australians, and I'm sure they understand what I'm saying. Like any settler colonial power, Zionism views us native Palestinians as another. The word used in Hebrew is goy. Be fought against. Palestinian resistance, peaceful or otherwise, is thus viewed as criminal violence, illegitimate terrorism, etc. Now, from the Palestinian perspective, the crystallization of the Zionist dream has meant dispossession and ghurba, that's to say exile for Palestinians. We have been robbed of our land, deprived of our identity and history, even our future has been stolen. Zionist response to these atrocities is that Palestinians should not have existed in the first place. We must remain visible. And this is why Israel's independence, which is being celebrated these days, has meant disaster for us, Palestinians who have become the victims of the victims. The goal of Zionism has always been to make us invisible, faceless, and voiceless refugees from nowhere, removed from the world's active consciousness. We had no history, no consciousness, no culture, and thus no story to tell. We Palestinians are native aliens who became foreigners with the misfortune of being born to non-Jewish fathers. You know, it is always frustrating that so many activists have no clue about the basics of the Palestinian question. I'm always surprised to find myself explaining how, contrary to what has been central in modern liberal thinking, that the idea of the citizen Israel is totally missing. Israel is a state where citizenship and nationality are two separate independent concepts. In other words, Israel is not the state of its citizens, but the state of the Jewish people. Moreover, Israel does not have constitution. It has basic laws. Further, since Judaism is religion, and since it is the basis of the existence of a modern state, why can Islam, Christianity, or Hinduism not be so for that matter? People ask me as to why Israel is doing this to Gaza. Answer simply is that because 75% of Gazans are refugees entitled to their right of return. They are a constant reminder of the original sin committed 72 years ago. This is why the last 10 years, Israel has launched 3 massive genocidal wars of aggression the occupied Gaza Strip, in which many of our civilians were massacred by its indiscriminate bombing. These terrible assaults left over 3,800 civilians of whom hundreds were children. More than 15,000 were injured. These wars in Gaza were subjected to relentless Israeli state terror, whereby Israeli warplanes systematically targeted civilian areas, reduced whole neighborhoods, vital civilian infrastructure to rubble, and destroyed scores of schools where civilians were taking shelter. This came after years of an ongoing, crippling, deadly medieval Israeli siege imposed on Gaza. In addition to these, Israel's daily attacks and airstrikes, we also suffer from contamination of water, air, and soil. And since the sewage system is unable to function due to power cuts necessitated by lack of a fuel, the main generator of the Gaza power station, then that affects medical conditions. Those medical conditions, due to injuries from internationally prohibited Israeli weapons, as well as from water contamination, cannot be treated because of the siege. Simple as that. In addition to the ban on building materials, Israel also prevents many other necessities from being imported. And I'm talking about very simple stuff, light bulbs, candles, matches, books, refrigerators, shoes, clothing, mattresses, sheets, blankets, etc., etc. I'm thinking of, even coffee, sausages, excuse me, flour, cows, pasta, cigarettes, fuel, pencils, pens, papers, you name it. Constant closure of the Rafah crossing, which is the only exit Gaza has to the external world. This has led one of the highest unemployment rates and poverty on the face of earth. So, question now, what is to be done? Now, the outside world has to intervene. Hence our call for BDS, investment sanctions. And in case we have some people who don't know what BDS is all about, BDS is a civil society initiative. We, the victims of multi-tiered system of oppression, occupation, colonization, and apartheid, fighting for the implementation of UN Resolution 194, which calls for the right of return to the towns and villages from which we were ethnically cleansed in 1948. Fighting for equality. World is not listening. World is standing by, watching us, dying daily basis. To tell you the truth, we found out 2005 that the only window of hope we have, BDS, we stop relying on world governments. We rely on civil society. And this is why we are away as civil society, and I'm talking about almost all civil society sectors here in Palestine. We hope to promote a culture of boycott of Israel, similar to the one the world led against the inhumane apartheid system of South Africa. And we know very well that in the mid-80s, I remember those of you who old enough to remember, in the mid-80s, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, everybody, all those Western leaders, argued that, said that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. The ANC, the African National Congress, was, a terrorist organization. That was 1985, 1986, 1987. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released. 1994, he became the first Black president of multiracial South Africa. So the question is, what happened? That crack in the world consciousness was created by, yes, mass mobilization on the ground in South Africa, and then a South African global-led campaign of investment and sanctions. This is what we are hoping for. We want international community to boycott Israel, divest from it, and from companies, international companies, benefiting from its oppression of the Palestinian people, and impose sanctions against Israel until it complies with international law. Now, if you want me to talk about political solutions, and I know that we are running out of time, and hopefully some other time we can talk about this, but I can tell you, personally, and I don't represent the BDS company here, personally, do believe the only possible practical solution that can bring about peace with justice in the Middle East is establishment of a secular democratic state on the historic land of Palestine. State for all of citizens, regardless of religion, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, gender, etc., etc. This is what happened in South Africa. This is what you have in all secular democracies. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that soon I can talk to you directly if you come and visit us in Gaza, or if I'm allowed to leave Gaza and come to Australia. Thank you so much.
Okay, we will now hear from Fayrouz Sharqawi, who is the Global Mobilization Coordinator at Grassroots Al-Quds, a platform for Palestinian organizations and grassroots movements in Jerusalem. Grassroots Al-Quds seeks to strengthen a Palestinian community mobilization and networking that builds Palestinian long-term strategies for Jerusalem. Fayrouz provides political tools and analysis about Jerusalem and has a broad and experienced understanding of development and resistance to oppressive policies under the Israeli occupation. And if you have any questions for Fayrouz as you are listening, could you please, in the Q&A chat function, actually write these questions for Fayrouz. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Jerusalem. Allow me, since we are remembering the Nakba, allow me to start by remembering my own late grandmother, Aisha, who was a refugee from Tantura, a beautiful village on the coast of Palestine that does not exist anymore. Just a reminder that there are millions of Palestinian refugees in and out of Palestine that remember their original villages these days. So I will speak about Nakba and today's reality in Jerusalem. I think I should start by saying that the Nakba is ongoing. The Nakba did not just happen in 1948. The Nakba developed, changed, and took different shapes in different parts of Palestine. The Palestinian people everywhere in occupied Palestine are divided and conquered. Different geographic locations that have different political realities. Myself, being a Palestinian from 1948 occupied lands, I see a lot of similarities between what happened in 48 occupied territory following the Nakba and what is happening in Jerusalem and has been happening in Jerusalem since 1967. I think that the Nakba in Jerusalem has a very literal meaning of displacement. Again, I think it took different shapes in different parts of Palestine, but in Jerusalem, the political reality that Palestinians live is the constant threat of being evicted from their city and displaced from their city. So in 1948, the western part of Jerusalem was ethnically cleansed. I am sure Tarek will touch on that because that's where he focuses his work. And in 1967, the eastern part was occupied. And since 1967, the Israeli occupation authorities have been developing and implementing very well netted and intertwined policies that aim all at the displacement of the Palestinians from Jerusalem. The Israeli big plan for Jerusalem is to have what they call a Jewish majority in the city. In the early 70s, the so-called demographic goal for Jerusalem was articulated, and Israel intends and plans to keep the Palestinians in Jerusalem, the Palestinian population in Jerusalem, under 30% of the total population within the municipal boundaries. And in order to do that, Israel did develop a whole set of policies that keep pushing Palestinians outside of Jerusalem, starting with the very special legal status that was imposed on the Palestinians living in the eastern part of Jerusalem. This legal status is misleadingly called a permanent residency. It is very important to realize that this is a legal status that usually is given around the world to immigrants. When a person immigrates to a new state, wishes to live there legally, be able to work there, they apply for a residency status, and which makes it ironic to see that a state that immigrated to Jerusalem is now treating Palestinian indigenous Jerusalemites as immigrants in their own city. In order to keep this permit to live in their city, Palestinians from Jerusalem have to constantly prove that Jerusalem is their center of life. This title or expression, center of life, is translated into Palestinians having to prove that they have a house, rented or owned in Jerusalem. They have to prove that they pay taxes in Jerusalem. They have to prove that they receive medical care and that their kids attend schools in Jerusalem. Palestinians cannot travel for a long extended time outside of Jerusalem without risking not being allowed back in. This all falls under the very special legal status that was created or given to the Palestinians in 1967. Using only this one tool of displacement, Israel has displaced almost 15,000 Palestinians from Jerusalem that were pushed outside of the city. They are not allowed to return to their own hometown, their birthplace, because according to the Israeli law, they did not hold up or fulfill the criteria to keeping that permit to live in their own city. After the legal status come the planning policies. In general, urban planning in Jerusalem very clearly aims at the displacement of Palestinians from Jerusalem, starting with the fact that when the Israeli occupation authorities allocate lands for different communities in Jerusalem, the Palestinian population in Jerusalem receives only 10% of the land in Jerusalem, which means that we have very little land to fulfill our needs of infrastructure, homes, streets, roads. This all is very missing. And if anyone listening to us today or watching us today has been to Jerusalem, then you must have noticed how neglected the Palestinian communities are, intentionally underdeveloped. Not enough homes, not enough shopping areas, not enough schools, not enough hospitals and medical centers. And this is all a direct result of this very intentional and guided policy. This also includes land confiscation. Palestinian lands are confiscated all the time for various reasons. whether it is for the construction of settlements, settler roads that connect settlements around Jerusalem and the West Bank in general. These lands are confiscated for military use. Lands were confiscated, of course, for the construction of the annexation and expansion wall. And so, and lands are confiscated also for the so-called national parks. Which are another tool to displace Palestinians by simply declaring that their lands are open scenic areas where no one is allowed to build or use the land, not even for farming. And so dispossession and uprooting Palestinians literally from Jerusalem happen all under the cover of the Israeli law. Home demolitions, around 2,000 structures were demolished in Jerusalem alone, in the eastern part of Jerusalem alone since 1967. This all happens under the cover of the Israeli law. It's very clear to see how the Israeli laws have been tailored to serve that Zionizing purposes and plans for Jerusalem. I think that when speaking about the infrastructure and land, it's also very important to say that Jerusalem is also physically isolated from the rest of the West Bank, even though the eastern part of Jerusalem was occupied with the West Bank in 1967. Since that year, Israel clearly has different plans for Jerusalem than the rest of the West Bank. And so the isolation of Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank started as early as 1967. Israel expands the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem and later on introduces the checkpoint regime in the early 90s, and checkpoints start, military checkpoints start isolating Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. And of course, in 2003, Israel also starts building its annexation and expansion wall that is today serving as the de facto border between Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, not only the West Bank, but also between Jerusalem city center and Jerusalem suburbs. Palestinian suburbs of Jerusalem are today isolated and separated from their city center, from their business district by the annexation and expansion wall. People living in Kufr Aqab and in Shafat refugee camp, we're talking about more than 100,000 residents. The number is estimated at 140,000 residents who hold that permit to live in Jerusalem, but are physically isolated from their city center. And these are only the two neighborhoods that are within the municipal boundaries. We are talking about many others, thousands of other Jerusalem residents who live in the Jerusalem villages, who are not even recognized by Israel as residents of Jerusalem. So in short, this the story of the Nakba, the story of the displacement and the uprooting of the Palestinians continues and takes a very clear and honest shape in Jerusalem, where displacement and uprooting literally continue happening to the Palestinian people. I will not repeat things that Dr. Eid said about the BDS. I think that the boycott movement and boycott in general is a very important tool to resist such structures. It is very important to realize that Israel's project in Palestine is very, very expensive. And in order to fund it, I keep saying it's not just the check that the United States sends to Israel every year that funds the Israeli occupation. It is also international complicity. It is time to realize that not only governments, but also corporations are invested in this reality. They make it happen. And it's time for people around the world to realize their own responsibility and power to change this reality. I think it's also time to realize that people do have that responsibility to organize their own homes. I see the Palestinian struggle very connected to many other struggles of oppressed people around the world. And I think that it is time also that people realize the power of their voice, the power of their pressure on their own governments regarding their foreign policies. people should realize that we count on that support. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Fayrouz. That was incredible. Okay, I'd like to now, we've been getting lots of questions as well. I'd like to now introduce Bassem Tamimi, who is one of the most prominent activists from the West Bank village of Nabi Salih, which has been the site of regular non-violent protest against the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory by the Israeli state. For this activism, Tamimi has been described as a human rights defender by Catherine Ashton, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy of the European Union. He has also been recognized by Amnesty International as a human rights defender and prisoner of conscience. Bassem's daughter, Ahad Tamimi, was detained by Israel's occupation forces in December 2017 when she was just 16 years old and imprisoned for 8 months. We welcome you to the stage now, Bassem, and if you could share your screen, please.
صباح الخير للجميع. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to call the voice of Palestine. You hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, the Nakba is not a historical event. It's a daily life and continuous process that started before 1948. It started when the Zionist project colonization started to believe that they have the right to come to Palestine and build their homeland. We believe that historically also the Zionism stolen the narrative of the Palestinian, the history of Palestine, the Judaism history on Palestine, because they are not the son or the grandson of the historical Jewish in Palestine. For that, if there is a Jewish who live in Palestine, in the history, they are our grandparents, not their grandparents. They are just a colonization people who want to take the land and stole the land. As Palestine is occupied, also the religion of the Jewish people are stolen and they must fight to take back their religion from the hands of the Zionism that represent Judaism for us as an occupation and colonization. I don't want to talk about history because everyone knows what's happening, because it's a historical genocide against the Palestinian, and we believe that the right of us to resist this occupation and this colonization, that it's not the enemy of the Palestinians, it's the enemy of the humanity. Israel is not the problem, because Israel is part of the colonization project all over the world. Israel is the guard for the interest of the capitalism, colonization, and the guard of the military industry all over the world. For that, when we fight Israel, we are in front of the world fighting the new liberalization and the colonization and the economic system that harm the life of all the people in all over the world. Our fight is a right fight against all the colonization and the capitalism all over the world. In our Nakba started in 1948 by the genocide and destroying the 531 village and expelled more than 750,000 Palestinians. And we became refugees outside and inside the historical Palestine. And we believe that our duty and responsibility is not to just talking about our pain and talking about our suffering, and we are don't want to victimize our issue and ourselves, because we believe as we decide to start our revolution and to start resisting the occupation, we are not defeated, and we believe that it's the only answer for the answer of the occupation that we must resist. This occupation will not continue forever, and this colonization project will fail under the stones of the resistance and the freedom fighter in Palestine and outside and inside. We believe our duty and responsibility is to resist the occupation and the colonization project. And I believe that we are not alone in the world, and we are happy that we have friends and supporters and who believe in our issue and want to help us and to end the suffering of the Palestinians. As I said, our Nakba is a continuous process since 1948 or before 1948, since the colonization project started as an idea in the mind of the leaders of the Zionist movement. And since that, we are facing a lot of suffering and a lot of crimes against us as a Palestinian, and it's continuous since history. But from my point of view, that our Nakba is in our consciousness that happened after Oslo Agreement. When we believe and when we start believe as a Palestinian BLO, Palestinian Liberation Movement, we start believe our organization, we start believe that we can make peace with the Zionism project. It's the main fail that in our history, that we believe that we can make this peace and started the peace process after Oslo and the negotiation. And this mean that we put the Palestinian narrative in different way, that it's changed the meaning of the occupation and changed the meaning of Israel. The Israeli Zionism left cheat the world and the Palestinian when they start the peace process and the two-state solution, which is a big mistake in our history, that we believe we can do that with the Zionism project. In my point of view, that the Oslo Agreement make two things that are very bad for our narrative, that the world start distinguish between Israel and occupation, that there is Israel, which is legal, and there is something comes from a legal state, which is occupation, and this is not true. Palestine and all Palestine is occupied. There is no, and they also start talking about the peace process and the negotiation about the detail of the Palestinian issue, about settlement or Jerusalem or the borders or something here or something that. I think it's the main settlement is one settlement is the Israeli state. Now we believe that we're talking about that the Israeli want to annex the part of the West Bank, and also it's a detail because the Great Israel is existing from the river to the sea. If we don't see that, we haven't any authority on any part or centimeters of Palestine. For that, what we are talking about, any annexing of some of our lands. All Palestine is our lands, and the future for us, and we will continue our resistance until we take all our land from the hands of the Zionism. Another thing that Oslo Agreement change and happened in our belief, that they start talking about that the Palestinian population is just the resident of Gaza and the West Bank. And this make a big mistake to talk about the right of return for the refugees. We have the right to return for all the refugees all over the world, and the Palestinian population is not just a resident of Gaza and the West Bank. 95% of the residents of Gaza is also refugees who want to return. Now, we believe our duty and responsibility is to continue our resistance, to rebuild our political system and political organization, BLO, and to continue starting our new liberation project to free Palestine from the hands of the Zionism. It's our duty and our responsibility. We must make a new political project that which have built on the resistance and built on the fighting and the struggle against this project, which is against the humanity, and have our political goal, the two-state solution goal, is destroyed. There is no opportunity for the two-state solution. The Israeli destroy this solution, and we believe that our duty and responsibility to rebuild our political organization, PLO, with a new goal and a new way of resistance that can give us more support and all over the world. A lot of people now talking about the one-state solution, that Palestine, from the river to the sea, for all the residents of Palestine. Now we are more than 6,300,000 Palestinians in the historical Palestine, which means we are existing in our land, and we will continue fighting to take our land back. The colonization will not continue forever. And we, as a Palestinian, believe that we are not alone in the world. We need you in Australia and everywhere, but we feel that we haven't the real support from the people or the state outside Palestine, which is believing and supporting Israel. Israel existing in our land by the support of the European country and USA and Australia also. I had been invited before to Australia, and when the Zionism movement start making a propaganda, they canceled my visa. This means that we are all not free, because we are controlled by this colonization all over the world. It's the fight for the humanity and the human rights and the human value. And we believe that with Israel existing, there is no peace all over the world. As Jesus started, the Palestinian prophet started from Palestine to bring peace for all over the world, we must start from Palestine to bring peace for all over the world through Palestine and through destroying the Zionism project that is against peace and the human right and the human value. Our message for you, we are continuing our fight, despite that there is somebody continuing believing in the two-state solution or not. We believe that Israel destroyed this opportunity, and we believe our duty and responsibility to continue our fight and our struggle to free our homeland and to destroy the Zionism project, colonization project in our land. It's our duty and our responsibility. We are not afraid that if someone talk about us as a terrorist or not terrorist, because we are fighting for our right. How the other evaluate our way and our method is their problem, not ours. We need, yes, we must took in our responsibility and in our account that we are part of the world. Yes, we are part of the world, and we need to be acceptable all over the world. For that, when we start the non-violent resistance, or what we will want to and like to name it popular struggle, we believe that it's more acceptable and more available, and it's more efficient and effective against our enemy. We start this way of resistance. We don't create it. It's a part of our resistance through our history, but we decide to rebuild a new model to like the first intifada, which was the main non-violent way of resistance in the Palestinian history. We started here and in some villages all over the West Bank, and we call the voice of Palestine and the voice of the Palestinian all over the world that we are existing in our land, resisting our enemy, and we will continue until we took our rights. It's our duty and our responsibility. We have a lot of aliens all around over the world, but also we need to change the way that the world deal with the Palestinian. Sometimes I met a lot of European and American, and they saw all the time feeling guilty for the Holocaust, the crime against the humanity, not against the Jewish. It's a crime against everyone in the world. And we believe, but when you feel guilty for something and you don't feel guilty for the same thing, it's mean there's something wrong. How the British feeling guilty for the Holocaust, and the German and the French, but they don't feel guilty for our Holocaust, the Nakba, which is they are responsible for that. That means when in all the European country, they teaching and learning the children and in the school about the Holocaust, but nobody talk about the Palestinian Nakba. This is what you and everyone in the world, we must fight to change this way of dealing with the Palestinian issue. And in some way, they want to victimize the Palestinian issue, to talk about Palestinian as a victim. We are not a victim. Yes, we are a victim, but our issue is not victim issue. And it's not a human right issue. We are a freedom fighter fighting to take back our homeland. And because we are fighting, and because the colonization, because we face the enemy of humanity, we have a lot of suffering, but we don't want to victimize to make the solution of the Palestinian issue as a human rights solution. It's not like that. We believe that our rights to return, not because the refugees are suffering in the refugee camps, also the people who live in any villa in Manhattan or any place in the world have the right to return. It's not the issue of suffering, it's the issue of rights. For that, we don't want to follow the media that want to victimize the Palestinian issue, also to make the support of the Palestinian by the people is just on feeling. We need your support, yes. We don't need your tears, because we have a lot of tears because of tear gas. We need more than your feeling and your tears. Yes, we are talking about suffering. We want you to feel about our issue, but we need your feeling and to be changed, to be as an opinion, and then the opinion to be an act to fight any face of the colonization in all over the world. Because as a Palestinian, we say a stone on the head of the snake here is a stone on the head of the snake in everywhere in the world.
Thank you.
We need your support, but also we need a real resistance, a real support. And we don't to feel that our duty and responsibility is just to feel sad for the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian suffering. The Palestinian fight and the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian battle is the battle of the world against the colonization and against the enemy of humanity. And as I said, if we need a real peace in all over the world, we can't have peace without struggling of the colonization and the capitalism and the military industry all over the world. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk, and we are continuing our struggle, and we need you in our struggle, and thank you to be our messenger in your country and everywhere in the world. Thank you, and thank everyone who talk about the Palestinian issue and take his responsibility and struggle the colonization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bassem, for that. It was amazing and incredibly heartfelt. And there have been lots of questions for you as well. We will now turn to Tarek Bakri, who is a Palestinian-born researcher based in Jerusalem, who was moved by the nostalgia and emotion still held by many displaced Palestinians for their former homes and villages. After graduating from Al Ahliya University in Jordan as a computer engineer, he developed the idea of documenting these personal stories and the displaced Palestinian villages through a personal initiative of visual documentation, and thus his 8-year ongoing project of We Were and Still Are Here was launched. Tarek is the recipient of the 2018 Jerusalem Award for Culture and Creativity and has held several exhibitions and seminars in Palestine, the Arab world, and Europe. He believes that memory is an undeniable human right and that memory is identity. Thank you, Tarek.
Tarek, we don't seem to be able to hear you.
Tarek, could you unmute?
Tarek, we're still not able to hear you, unfortunately.
We can't hear you still, Tarek. Can you raise the volume, because you're not muted, it seems, but there's no sound? Do you want to try taking your earphones off?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. So if you can just start from the beginning. Wonderful.
Yeah, maybe it was muted because I tried to share my screen, and then since it's a visual documentation, I have to share the screen to show you the initiative. So anyways.
Do you want to try again and share it? Now that you have the
I'm gonna
earphones,
try to share it again now. I'm gonna try to share it again now, okay?
yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? And can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. That's perfect.
Okay, great. So I've started this initiative maybe 8 years ago. I was studying abroad, and most of my friends, they are Palestinian refugees. As you know, the majority of Palestinians, they live outside of historical Palestine. So, you know, you can say that I'm privileged to be living in Palestine, especially in Jerusalem, so that I can go everywhere in historical Palestine except of Gaza, the big prison of Gaza. So the thing started by coincidence, like just sending my friends pictures from where they are from. For example, if I'm in Palestine in a while between 2 semesters, and I'm on my way to Jaffa or to Haifa, and I know someone of my friends, he's originally from Tantura, for example, is where Fayrouz's mother is from. So I say in my mind, okay, I'm going to Haifa. Why not going to Tantura to show my friend who's living in Jordan or in Damascus his village? So it started like this, and then after graduation and returning back to Palestine, I started going to an ethnic cleansed village every week. You know, in Palestine, we have more than 500 villages that were destroyed and ethnic cleansed in 1948. So, and then something else happened that a friend of mine, and this is how I'm going to tell you how this kind of visual documentation started in this technique. So I have a friend who lives in Jordan. His name is Munir. Munir, he's originally from a village in Jerusalem that was destroyed in 1948. And once he got a permission to come to Palestine, and for a Palestinian living in the diaspora, it was a great opportunity just to come and see where is he from. So when Munir came to Palestine, we went to every city, to Jaffa, Haifa, Akka, Jerusalem, everywhere. So on his last day, Munir had an old picture of his family in front of their house in their village. And he said, Tarek, I want to see my village. And I told him, yes, I'm going to show you the village on the last day. So when he came to Palestine, he came on this picture. So this is his family in front of the house before Nakba. So we started searching where the house is. The village is destroyed. You can find some walls and some houses here and there, but it wasn't that most of the houses were destroyed. Maybe after an hour or two of searching, we found the house, and then Munir sat down like this, and I took the picture from the same angle as his family took 60 or 70 years ago. And this is how the initiative started. And then I said, any Palestinian living anywhere in the world has an old picture before 1948, just send it to me. I can go and find where the house is and to make documentation about the house. So Palestinians from all over the world started sending me pictures of their houses and their properties. And there are so many stories. Like, as there's something that I always do is sometimes I knock on the door to see what happened. And you know, there are Israeli laws in which they make to take the Palestinian land and houses, like the property absentee law. So sometimes when I find a house, I knock on the door. There are some houses in the main cities that now there are Israelis living in these houses. For example, this house is in Jerusalem, in Talbiya. So Shukri Al-Jamal, after building his house, he took this family picture with his family in the 20s. And then the Nakba happened in 1948, and the family was expelled, and now they live in the diaspora. And so I took this picture, I printed this picture, and then I went to find the house. Then I found it, and I took the exact same picture from the same angle. Then, unfortunately, when I knocked on the door and I showed the Israeli man who was living in this house, I told him, man, you're living in this house of Shukri. This is his house. This is his family, and you know that. So, unfortunately, what he said He said, okay, what can I do for you? We are the chosen people, and God gave me this house. So it's really sad that they make the conflict as a religious conflict based on religion. So this was his answer, like God gave him this house. There are some other reactions from other Israelis, but most of them, they are not sorry at all. And they believe just, okay, we were stronger in the war and you left, and now this house is mine. And as you know, there are millions of Palestinian refugees everywhere. So this initiative, it also, what helps this initiative is the social media. You know, before, after 1948, the communication between Palestinians was really difficult. And you know, for example, one family in 1948, maybe the father would go from from a street or like to a country, and then his sons, they go to another place, and we were really distracted. So people tried to connect with each other through the radio, through letters. But now with the social media and with the technology, it's much easier, where people can find their relatives and also to find their houses and properties. So it's easy that someone, for example, sends me a picture from Lebanon, from a refugee camp in Lebanon, and tells me, Tarek, I want to see my house in Palestine. So I go there and I make the documentation to see what happened there. And also there's a part in this initiative to focus on how Palestine was civilized before 1948. You know, the Israelis, they always claim that they came to an empty land, a land without people, to people without land. No, we Palestinians, we existed here. We were living here. We had cinemas, we had banks, we had our life, factories, everything. So you did not come to just an empty land in Palestine. So people kept sending these pictures from all over the world. And it's really important because, you know, for me as well, I make a research about every neighborhood, about every village, about every area when people send me these pictures. And what makes this initiative different is that it's based on the Palestinian narrative itself. You know, we have so many sources. We have so many Palestinian historians who wrote about Nakba and about what happened to us. But when you link this visual material and combine it with the personal Palestinian narrative, it becomes different, and it's showed in a different way that it's easily can be kept in the memory. For example, I'm just gonna tell you about one of the stories in Ain Karam. Ain Karam, it's a village in Jerusalem that was destroyed, or not, ethnic cleansing in 1948 was not destroyed. You know, for example, Jerusalem, only in Jerusalem, the Israelis, they destroyed and ethnic cleansed 39 villages in 1948. But one of the villages that remained is Ain Karam. Ain Karam is famous of John the Baptist was born in this Palestinian village. And this village in 1948, the Israelis, they didn't destroy any house. They just kicked the people after Deir Yassin massacre, because, you know, Deir Yassin is only 3 kilometers from Ain Karam. And then they brought Zionist families to live in these Palestinian houses. And this is an old Palestinian picture from Ain Karam 100 years ago, Palestinian women wearing the Palestinian dresses with its embroidery. And this is a new picture of the place. And in this village, you know, 2/3 of it, they were Muslims, and 1/3 they were Christians. And you know, after you build your house, if you're Muslim, you put a prayer on above the door, and if you're Christian, you put a cross. So once I was there, and there was a prayer above a house, and there was an Israeli woman coming out from it. So I said, I just want to ask her about the history of the house. So I said, hi, my name is Tarek. Do you live here? She said, yes, I live here. I told her, is this house yours? She said, yes, it's my house. I told her, was this house yours? And she understood my question. I said, Yes, actually, it was for a Palestinian family, but they left, as if they left for a picnic, you know. Not after the massacre of Deir Yassin, where more than 200 Palestinian civilians were slaughtered. So I told her, what do you know about this house? She said, well, actually, we came from Poland and we were really poor. My mom and my grandmother came from Poland, and the Jewish agency were giving people houses in this village, and they told them, hey, take this house, it's yours. I told her, what do you know about this house? She said, I know that the Palestinian family who were living here, they were really rich. I told her, okay, why? Why did you say that? She said, can you imagine when we entered the house in 1948, there was a radio in the house. So I was like, oh, wow, great. Did you change anything in the house? She said, there was everything in the house. We only changed one thing. In my mind, I said, maybe they changed the beds, mattresses, something. She said, we only changed one thing. We took the pictures of the Palestinian family from the frames and we put our pictures. They didn't even change the frame of the picture. So at that moment, I couldn't handle it. I just wanted, I wanted to leave this conversation and just go. And she said, wait, I remembered another thing. I told her what? She said, when we entered the house, I think that the Palestinian family, they were about to have a meal because we found spoons, plates, and knives on the table. So it's so harsh, it's so unfair what happened. And God knows where the Palestinian family now, in which refugee camp in Jordan they are living nowadays. And then someone came to your house to use your utilities and everything. So in this initiative as well, for example, I just want to tell you something. Everyone knows Golda Meir. Golda Meir, she always claimed that there is nothing called as Palestinian people. This was in the Washington Post in 1969. She said as if they came to an empty land. So Golda Meir herself, the prime minister in the 60s, she was living in this house in Talbiya, West Jerusalem. So she was living in the house of Hanna Bsharat. This is the family of Hanna Bsharat in front of their house in 1929 after the baptism of his daughter. So the one who claimed that there's nothing called the Palestinian people, she was herself living in a Palestinian house in Jerusalem. So this is the kind of documentation that I do. I also focus on the civilization in Palestine before 1948, the theaters, the cinemas everywhere in Haifa, in Jaffa, for example. This is a cinema in Jaffa. It was one of the most luxurious cinemas in the Middle East on that time. The opening of this cinema was with the film of Kulthum and Nasheed Al-Amal. And nowadays, this cinema, what happened to it? After Nakba, the Israelis, they turned it into a cinema as well for a while, and then it became a medical center and a bank. And now it's a center for the Scientology. Can you see, like, a Palestinian cinema built in 1937 with you can see the Palestinian flag on it as well. And now it's a Scientology church in occupied Jaffa. Okay, I'm gonna tell you just one more story, or maybe more. I don't know if you're like, if you are not bored. One of the stories, it's really important to me because
Tarek?
فقدنا الصوت طارق معلش.
Okay, I think we... Hello, Tarek?
Hear me?
Oh, yes, we got you back.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. So yes, and one of the stories that once I was in Kuwait doing a talk about on كنا وما زلنا, and you know, someone approached and he said, Tariq, I'm originally from Jerusalem and I have an old picture of my family in Jerusalem, and I'm a Palestinian American. So I told him, okay, if you're a Palestinian American, you can come to Palestine, come and visit, and we go and we can find your house. So he came after a few months, he came with his family to Jerusalem, and we went to the western part of the city. We found the house, and we took the picture from the same angle as well. So what was strange in this story is that when we entered when we found the house and started, you know, taking picture of it, there were the Israelis who were living there, and in some kind they sympathized with them. But for me, okay, it's now you're living in the place of someone else. Nothing will change what's happening now. So the reactions of the Israelis they are different. Like, as I told you, some of them, they say that we are the chosen people and God gave me this house. Some people, they say, okay, I find myself here, what can I do? You have to admit that a Nakba happened. Okay, you have to admit that even if you are living here, but you are living in the place of someone else, this does not change the thing that this is theft and this is not your house. Okay, just not put it like this is history, this is what happened, what can I do? It's so different here. Okay, so another part of the initiative is I document the ethnically cleansed villages through the personal stories of the Palestinians themselves. You know, as I said in the beginning, we have so many sources of Palestinian historians and books and everything. But when it comes to the personal story and the narrative of the Palestinian, it's different. You know, we have so many kinds of destroyed Palestinian villages. Okay, sometimes you can't find anything, just a cactus here and there, because people they used to plant planted around their houses. In some villages, they are semi-destroyed. In other villages, there are empty houses here and there. And there are also another kind of houses where the Israelis living in these Palestinian houses, like Ain Hod, like Ain Karim, like Malha and other places in Palestine. But as I said, what's different here is that I document the stories from the stories or the narrative of the Palestinians. Any Palestinian who has the ability to come and visit Palestine on a foreign citizenship, I take them, we go and document the village. We have also to make clear that the vast majority of Palestinians living in the Arab countries, they are not only allowed to return to Palestine, they are not allowed to visit it as well. Okay, but there are other Palestinians living in the diaspora, for example, in Australia, in Europe, in the States, okay, who now have a foreign citizenship that makes them able to come and visit Palestine for a while. And also, you know, the Israelis, it's not only like if you have an Australian citizenship, you can come to Palestine. Also, the Israelis, they control who visits the country, and every one of you knows that. But what makes it important, like, and when I document these stories, every Palestinian who returns to Palestine has a different meaning of returning back. For example, sometimes people, they take things with them. They take dirt, soil. For example, this woman, she came to her house in Jaffa for the first time. She came from Kuwait, and then she took oranges from her house in Jaffa, and she called her sister back in Kuwait, and she said, "Hey, I took back some of our oranges." So for her, this was the return, like the temporary return to Palestine. And you know, maybe most of you know the story of Zena. Zena, she lives in Australia. She came to Palestine for the first time. and we made a wedding for her in Akka, and that's why we called her the bride of Akka. And then we convinced her dad to come to Palestine, and then he came to Palestine for the first time after 71 years. The thing I'm gonna tell you is that you know, sometimes I'm really surprised that surprised from the third and the fourth generation of Nakba. You know, the Israelis, they always claim that the old will die and the young will forget. But as long as I see, sometimes refugees from like they are born in 1998 or sometimes in 2002. They know every detail in Palestine. When they call me from a refugee camp in Lebanon, they can tell me all their neighbors, the streets' names, everything. So this is so surprising to me. And for example, a Palestinian who came from, he was born in Al Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria. And then in the 80s, he went to the States. And now he has American citizenship. And he said, Tarek, I know your project. We were and we still are here. But I don't have a picture. But I have a map that my uncle, he's 96 years old in the camp, he drew it for me. And you know, in this map, it's written like Beirut, Haifa Street, the sea in Akka, half kilometer from the coast. So then I brought another map from the British Mandate in 1921, just to try and to find the house. And then Maher, his name is Maher, he came and we went to Akka to find his house. You know, at some point I'm holding the map, trying to find it. We were driving, and then you know it's the sixth sense of the Palestinian. He told me, brother, can you just go the first right and then take the first left? I said in my mind, my God, he didn't spend 12 hours in Palestine yet. It's his first time here. How come like he tells that, please go from here and there? I said, okay, fine, I'm gonna follow him. Then we stood in front of a house. He stood then he went around the house and he said, Tarek, this is our house. I told him, what? Then he started counting the trees. He said, there are 24 trees and there's something red above the door. This is our house. This is what my father told me. And then he stood in front of it and we were all shocked. Then an old woman was walking there in Akka, and I told her, hey ma'am, do you know this house? She said, yes, that house, it's for Abdel Fattah al-Sadi, and this house, this is for Shamma family. They were expelled from Palestine in 1948. So I told her this is his son. So that's how you like combine the oral documentation, the history, the maps, the pictures with the story of the Palestinians themselves. So this is so shocking. Sometimes, you know, most of the Palestinians, they can't come to Palestine. They are in refugee camps. Sometimes what I do is that I make video calls for people who are not allowed to come to Palestine. For example, this old Palestinian man, he lives in a refugee camp in Syria, in Homs refugee camp. He's originally from Tabariya, the Sea of Galilee, and the city there. And I went to his city and I made video call for him for hours, and you know, he knew everything, even the stairs. Like when I was walking in Tabariya, for example, I tell him I'm in front of this tower. He tells me, okay, look at your left, there are 4 stairs here. And you can find everything, he said. So then I went to the place where his house was, and we found out that the house was demolished only 3 years ago, and now a new building is being built in his place. So I was really disappointed. I told him, hey grandpa, your house was destroyed. And he said, okay, fine. I will return back to Palestine. I will put a tent until I build it again. I really miss the Sea of Galilee, the lake. Can you just show it to me? So it's as simple as this. We should not like, connect our return to Palestine with sometimes with physical things, because the Israelis, they destroyed hundreds of villages. So I'm from here, I'm gonna return to Palestine. Okay, my house was demolished, it's fine. I'm gonna return to Palestine, put a tent until I build it again, and I'm gonna live here. So people that are really living on this hope, and we all of us, we believe in the right of return, which is really the essence of the Palestinian cause. And sometimes generations, they come, like the grandfather and his sons and grandsons, they all try to make like an individual return to Palestine. If we are now weak and we can like make a collective return to Palestine, and because of the Israelis, they are above the international law, and we have the UN resolutions like 194 about the Palestinian refugees and their return to Palestine, some people, they make this right of return as individuals. And this is what's happening. We document all these stories in videos, in pictures, and everything. I don't know if you want me to stop here or to tell 2 more stories. It's because of the time.
I think it's amazing. I think we could all continue listening, but we want to give you a chance to ask. We've got so many questions. We're not going to get through them all. You've sparked a lot of curiosity about the project. So thank you so much for that. It was wonderful. See, we've got people saying, please keep going. But we have lots of questions, including for you. So we'll get to the questions now. Thank you so much, Tarek.
Thank you.
Okay, that was, I'm sure you all agree, absolutely heartbreaking, powerful, invigorating, and it was such a privilege to sit and listen to all of you. And we have had so many questions, so much interest, and so much support, and so many incisive, provocative, and very, very prescient questions. So the first question, we've actually got a question for Dr. Haidar, who has sent in a voice message in response. The question is, can you please update us on the Great March of Return? How much is it still an independent movement, or how much has it been taken over by Hamas? And we'll listen now to the voice response.
The Great March of Return. When the Great March of Return started, it was a civil society initiative. Almost all civil society sectors and political organizations supported it. Unfortunately, over the time, it was sort of factionalized, and then political organizations took over. I took part in the Great March of Return. I joined it since its inception, and until the discourse started changing in the last 3 or 4 months of the Great March of Return. And my idea was that to keep it only as a civil society initiative and learn from the BDS movement, the Palestinian-led BDS movement, especially the BNC, the Boycott National Committee, which is the largest civil society coalition in Palestine. Unfortunately, the discourse at the end of the Great March of Return started changing a little bit, and most people tend to believe here in Gaza that Hamas managed to take over the Great March of Return. But having said this, still there are representatives from almost all political organizations in Gaza, and I think it needs improvement. It definitely needs improvement, and civil society has to take the initiative back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the next question we have, I will pose to Fayrouz. Fayrouz, the question comes from Facebook. Is the Palestinian situation fundamentally caused by racism? Is it that Europeans can go anywhere they want in the world, including Asia, Africa, South and North America, and the Pacific, and their states will be celebrated like the US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada? The indigenous people have been wiped out or silent. What makes Palestine any different? So is the situation fundamentally caused by racism?
Racism is certainly a factor, a big factor in the situation in Palestine. I believe that it is true because also within the Israeli public themselves, the racism against people of color is very clear. At the same time, I think that can be only described as a factor in this situation. I think that it's very important to realize that there are political interests and there are economic interests that are maintaining the situation in Palestine. It is not merely the fact that human beings are racist naturally or not, but I think that it's important to realize that race is certainly a tool, a factor in this racism, but I would remind everyone that this is not just about the Palestinians, whether they have the right or not, the rights in general or not. I think that it's important to realize that the ongoing military occupation and the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people is a political what's behind it is political interests, it's economic interests that are pushing forward the situation on the ground. I think that it's important how we see it, because then it also implies something about how we can resist it, how we can change the situation. And I think that racism is fundamental in everywhere, not only in Palestine. In all political structures, people of color around the world are facing racism, minorities, groups, indigenous people for sure. At the same time, I think that we need to realize that this situation, the occupation, the ongoing occupation and the ongoing Nakba fulfills aspirations and needs and interest. And I think once we look at it like that, then we realize also the power we have to change it. I certainly think that we need to take down all racist structures around the world. I think that people need to realize that whether willingly or not, awarely or not, somehow everyone is involved in the situation on the ground in Palestine. People are complicit, people are supporting, again, even if unwillingly, because I think that people need to realize that companies, corporations, and not only governments, as I said before, have interests in this situation continuing. And I think that once we realize that, we realize also our power as individuals, as well as societies and peoples around the world, to say no, not in my name and not with my taxpayer money do you support this structure in Palestine. There is so much that people can do. I think that people need to realize that choices they make in their own daily lives, and again, not only the choice you make every time you go to vote for a new government, and I think that is fundamental, crucial, and important, that people realize that their choices of governments affect not only their own political reality, but also our political reality in Palestine and many peoples around the world. But I think also that people need to realize that very basic choices we make about the food we eat and the tourism we make and the things we buy and places we visit and where we spend our money most probably affects someone's political reality around the world. I think that in a world where capitalism and liberal economies dictate political realities of people around the world should understand and realize their own responsibility. it is not enough to be in solidarity. Bassem said before, we don't want your tears. I think that's an important note to make, that there is much more than just feeling with the Palestinians that can be done. And I am hoping that people listening are also now thinking about the ways that they can support. I think that also oftentimes people from outside of Palestine think that supporting the Palestinian cause can only happen if you come here, join our demonstrations, or help us harvest our olives, or volunteer in our communities. I think that is all very important, but I think that people tend to forget the responsibility they have back home. I think that people don't realize that there is so much they can do from back home that can help the Palestinian people as well. I think that talking to the Australian public is something that people can do, because choices that, again, people make when it comes to governments and political choices, they directly affect our reality. So this is not to say that we don't need the volunteers. This is not to say that we are not thankful for this help, but I think that oftentimes it is thought and believed that this is the only help you can give the Palestinians. But again, changing your own political reality, I think, has a direct effect on my own reality. I think that again, speaking to Australians and to an Australian audience, you can just look at your own history and see what was done to the indigenous people. And I think that this also needs to be realized and acknowledged in Australia before even acknowledging what happened to the Palestinian people. I think also there is a need to build networks and to build connections between the different struggles around the world, because eventually different groups fighting different political realities, even though they can be worlds apart, very far away physically from each other, eventually we are facing the same enemy. We are fighting the same structures, imperialism, capitalism, and I think that we need to start supporting each other. We need to start having a conversation. We need to start building those bridges so that we can support each other's work, support each other's mobilization, and realize that we do have the power. We just need to open our minds and look outside of the toolbox that can be sometimes very limited. We can see many other ways that people can get involved than what is happening right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fayrouz. The next question is for Bassem. We have heard a lot about history and the current dreadful state of denial of human rights in Palestine. It is clear that Zionists in Israel and the US intend to act as colonial powers, expand borders, remove Palestinians. Is the Palestinian Authority efficient and competent in affecting change for people? Is Hamas and their actions supported by the majority of Palestinians? There have been a lot of questions, and we're not going to get a chance to address all of them. So this question has been asked in many ways. It's basically a question about the political leadership or the absence of it, and a commentary, please, on the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Bassem. We might have lost him. Bassem, are you there? All right. Tarek or Fayrouz, would either of you like to address that? Fayrouz, did you want to comment on that?
Please, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. So it's a question about the Palestinian Authority. Does it have the competency and efficiency to affect change for Palestinians, and also Hamas and their actions, are they supported by the majority of Palestinians?
These are very good questions, especially regarding the Palestinian Authority.
You hear me?
Okay, now
Is back.
yes,
I
okay.
can hand him
Did you hear
his
the question?
About the Palestinian
Yes.
Authority and the division, or what? I don't understand it.
Yeah. So the question is about commenting on the effectiveness of the Palestinian Authority as leadership, and also is Hamas supported by the majority of Palestinians?
I think our problem is creating the Palestinian Authority without authority. The Palestinian Authority have no authority. And I think the division and the conflict between Hamas and PLO and Fattah movement is about the authority, not about the freedom or liberation project. Because all of them have the same goal and the same opinion about the two-state solution. I think the conflict comes because of the political conflict comes because not as a political issue, but about the authority and the interest of the authority itself. From my point of view, yes, sometimes when the people, when Fattah movement and PLO start changing their way of talking about the historical Palestine and the free all Palestine and talking about the two-state solution, the people start moving from the national movement to the Islamic movement, Hamas and Al-Jihad. But I think what happened to the people, they are shocked when Hamas go and follow the same process that Fattah do when they comes to the election. And they became part of the PLO itself, and they start fighting for the same goal. I think what shook the people that when Hamas run and ride the same bus, and they start fighting for who drive the bus, not about the bus itself. I think the peace process and the Oslo agreement and all what happened and what happened after that, the Palestinian Authority is part of our mistake that changed the priority of the people. And I think the people now are searching for third option or third choice to be followed, because they don't, I think most of the people are not, yes, now they are supporting, the people are supporting Hamas and Fattah because there's no another alternative. I think if there another alternative that comes and took part of the Palestinian struggle and Palestinian political system, I think, and talking about different goal and talking about the real resistance and historical Palestine, I think the people will follow. And yes, from the beginning, Hamas was supported by most of the people, but now when they comes to the authority, they lost part of their audience, as Fattah also lost most of their audience.
I think, thank you, Bassem. I think Fayrouz, you wanted to add something, is that right?
Yes, I want to make the point that it might look from the outside to many people that the Palestinian Authority is the actual Palestinian political leadership, that the Palestinian Authority has in front of its eyes the goal of protecting the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian struggle. But I need to say that most Palestinians do consider the Palestinian Authority a traitor, a collaborator with the occupation, a collaborator with the Israeli authorities. The Oslo Agreement is not a peace agreement. The Oslo Agreement that also created the Palestinian Authority is making the Israeli control even more stronger, more permanent. The Palestinian Authority, by default, by definition, is a contractor of the occupation of the Israeli authorities in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority does not represent the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority does not protect Palestinian rights. The Palestinian Authority serves Israel and serves the occupation. The Palestinian Authority is not independent. The Palestinian Authority is is controlled also by its own donors. It is the biggest NGO in Palestine. I think there are a lot of misunderstandings and mistakes about the Palestinian Authority, and I would like to use this opportunity as a Palestinian, talking to people who might think and probably rightfully so, if they are not aware of details of our Palestinian case, might think that, yeah, well, of course, we're talking about the Palestinian political leadership, but it is very misleading. The Palestinian Authority has been only making it easier for Israel to continue controlling the Palestinians and Palestinian population everywhere. The Palestinian Authority is also an oppressive authority, and it violates Palestinian rights, not only supports Israel and works for Israel, but it also violates Palestinian human rights. And I think that people need to realize that many Palestinians, and I am one, believe that in order for us to actually find a solution, we need to first of all dismantle the PA and get rid of the PA, because it creates the impression that we have some sort of authority. And Bassem just said, it's an authority without any authority. It's an authority without any sovereignty. And I think that this misunderstanding needs to be clarified about the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you, Fayrouz. Tarek, you have a question that's been posed to you based on, well, they've asked whether or not, what is the preferred choice of Palestinians, including refugees? Has a survey ever taken place to establish their preferred choice? Would they prefer a one-state solution with the right of return for all refugees and full voting rights for all Palestinians, or a two-state solution based on the 1946 borders with all stolen land returned, again with the right of return for all refugees?
Well, actually, we are the oppressed people. We should have the choice. And sometimes it's different from a refugee to another because it's, at some point, a personal decision on what you want, and sometimes it's collective. For example, when I go to the refugee camps in Lebanon, I ask people if you are originally from a village in Safad, okay, and you want to, if there's like a solution, I want to return to Palestine, would you go to the West Bank, to Ramallah or Nablus to live there, or you want to go to your original village? So most of them, they say, no, it's my original village or the grave. I will not go like to other place. Some people, like it's different based on the refugee camp, because you know other places like for example as well in Lebanon, you know how the Palestinians are living in the refugee camps there. They say we are really living in bad situations here in Lebanon. We can go anywhere for a while, but then there's no compromise about our right to return to our original villages in Palestine. So people themselves, they make the decisions. But after all, in the history, if you like, people, they are originally from here, they should have the right to return back to where they are originally from. So not any resolution not any political decision makes it like to people like if you want to go there or there. So and at some point everyone can live in this area. The villages, they are still here. Okay, they destroy the villages, but people can return back to their villages. And there are so many historians like Dr. Salman Abu Sitte, who made a study. You know, because they always claim that there is no place for everyone. Now everything has changed. No, people, they can return back to where they are originally from, and they can live in it.
Thank you, Tarek. Bassem, the next question has come through. It's a question about young people and the toll this takes on young people. And it's an appropriate question given that your daughter was imprisoned at age 16. And you know, it attracted world headlines, even though this is happening on a daily basis. The intimidation, the brutality against Palestinian children. In your view, what impact does this have on young Palestinians?
What is the Israeli doing?
Yes, so what is the generational impact on young Palestinians?
I think the new generation is more free than us, and they are believe more for the one-state solution, not the two-state solution. I think when I talk with the new generation, they are more free because they are not controlled by the political party as our generation, and they are free to talk about their goals and their what they want. Sometimes when we were in their age, in the first intifada or before, when you ask a Palestinian youth, he talk about his political opinion that I'm from Fattah movement, BFLB, DFLB, and feel proud of that. Now the people are not, it's not part of their identity to talk about their political party. They are talking about, we are a Palestinian, and they talk about their Palestinianity and their identity on Palestine in general, not talking about the political party. This is part of the change in this time for the point of view of the new generation. But also, there is a problem in the mind sometimes in this generation that they are not ready to pay the price as our generation. It's change sometimes the consumption or the culture is affecting the mind or the way of thinking of this generation, and this is part of that what's the media and the new liberalization and the colonization do through the media and through what they are want to change the mind of the people. This is the new way of the colonization, where they change the mind and change the knowledge that the people took and talk about. That is, but I feel that this generation will be ready. As Ahad said, we are not victims, we are a freedom fighter. For that, when they represent themselves as a freedom fighter, this will change the point of view of the world, and they change their narrative to talk about the Palestinian issue. For that, when you ask the people all over the world not to see our issue as a victim, this means we are a freedom fighter. This changed the way that they deal with our issue. That when you support somebody, when we were in South Africa, I told the people, we don't need your money. We need your real support, because we are not a victim, we are a freedom fighter. When you saw us as a freedom fighter, you can think of our issue in a different way, and you can change your way to deal with how to support the Palestinian. We are not fighting for our issue, just for our issue. We are in front of the world fighting the interest of the capitalism and the colonization, which Israel the guard of that. I think the new generation may be more free to talk about his right, and they are need to be educated and take our experience as the previous generation to help them, not to control them, but to give them our experience, and not to be a leader of them, but just to advise them how to learn from our experience.
Thank you, Bassem. We've just extended this a little bit so that we can have one more question for Tarek and one more question for Fayrouz. So Tarek, there's been questions about the practicalities of your project. Has the IDF and Israeli government attempted to stop your work? Has it tried to make your work more difficult? Have they given you a hard time with it?
To be frank, no, nothing happened, because it's a humane initiative. Based on our narratives, there's no incitement in it, nothing. Sometimes I imagine, like, if they want to ask me, why did you take this old woman to her house? You accuse me for that, for example. So, or like, why this Swedish, originally Palestinian girl went to her village. So nothing happened like this, and we're talking about the ethnic cleansing, and there are Israeli historians like Ilan Pape. Everyone knows the history and what happened. Everyone wrote about that, but the thing is that I'm just showing this this history in a different way. So no, nothing, no pressure from any place.
Thank you, Tarek. Fayrouz, there's a question here for you. Do you think that the US will allow annexation of the Jordan Valley, since this may, create a lot of incitement and problems in the Arab world, and would make the occupation more visible? Or will this be a drawn out process so that the world doesn't notice as much?
I think it is important to say that the annexation has been happening for over 50 years now, since the occupation of the West Bank, since the occupation of the eastern part of Jerusalem. Israel has been annexing them de facto all the time. Whether it will happen officially, I think we need to resist it, regardless whether it will be declared officially or not. Right now there is a new Israeli government, and in their contract they are talking about the annexation taking place already in July. But I think, again, it is important to realize that this is not just one incident that might happen and we need to fight it or campaign against it. I think that it's important we realize that building the settlements, the colonies all over the West Bank, including the Jordan Valley, in the eastern part of Jerusalem, building the Israeli industrial zones, building the infrastructure, the settler roads. There is a huge network of settler roads that serve not only the movement of settlers, but also the movement of Israeli goods in and out of the West Bank, because that's where they are manufactured oftentimes. I think it's important to realize that this has been an ongoing project. This is exactly what it means to realize that Israel is a settler colonialist state that has been, since its creation, trying to replace one people with another, one history, one language, one culture with another, but also one economy with another. And I think that what's important to see here is that the annexation is de facto on the ground. Ask some Palestinians, whether it is in the Jordan Valley or in the eastern part of Jerusalem or other areas that are under the discussion of annexation right now, they would tell you that it would only be a formalization stamp on the paper. The annexation is not going to start. The annexation is happening. The annexation is real. It is on the ground, and which means we need to continue resisting it and not see it just as one step that a new Israeli government might or might not take. Whether the US will allow it or not, I think that again, the US has been enabling Israel. The US has been enabling this annexation since it started. Whether it will create a storm in the Arab world, that's a big question as well. I think that also our Arab brothers and sisters live under oppressive governments that are finding it now easier than ever to normalize with Israel very openly, very shamelessly. So I'm just putting a lot of question marks over there on the question itself. I think that we need to, I think it's a great question, and I think that we need to see the bigger picture. It's not just whether the settlements in the Jordan Valley will be annexed or not. It's just the fact that Israel exists all over Palestine. All of Palestine is occupied. The Palestinian economy does not exist. Palestinian political leadership does not have any sovereignty. I think that these are basic understandings, fundamental understandings about the situation here that are relevant, of course, to how do we mobilize about them, against them, how do we resist them. I think it's really important to see the picture that way.
Thank you so much. It's been an incredible afternoon. I don't want anyone who's registered and listening today to just log off now. There has been a call from our amazing Palestinian brothers and sisters here to take action, that we need to actually offer solidarity in deed and word. It's not about pity, it's not about victimizing Palestinians, but doing what we can. And we live in a country, Australia, which is an unashamed supporter, an enabler of Israel. We need to apply pressure on our politicians. We need to apply pressure on the media in the way that it misrepresents this as a conflict rather than a colonial struggle. We need to be doing as much as we can to support Palestinian groups so that we can have more of these sessions to educate and build a critical mass of people who can then apply pressure on governments and states to actually affect power. And of course, we need to get behind the BDS movement, boycott, sanctions and divestment, and that is a people power project. So there is nothing that we cannot do to support our Palestinian brothers and sisters. One thing that I would like to share is that there is going to be a public event by BDS Australia and the Coalition for Peace and Justice in Palestine, Coronavirus and Annexation, a report from Palestine. We're going to provide the link on the Facebook page, so please have a look at that and get behind this, in not only in word, not only in keyboard activism, but indeed as well, because we need to be there for Palestinians. Thank you so much for your time today. It's just been an incredible honor and privilege to bear witness to what you have shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.